Well, a very good morning to you. I must apologise for sitting down, but I've been dragged from my sick bed because I couldn't possibly say no to Lucia Macari or any other member of the Macari family. Dear friends for many years from the day they first came to Mumbles. And I suppose the story started in 1936. May the 29th, 1936. And that was the day the ice cream parlour opened in Mumbles, Forte's ice cream parlour. And none of us realised what an impact that would make in the society which was Mumbles then. But to appreciate what it did to Mumbles, you've got to know what Mumbles was like in those days. It's very much smaller than it is now. In 1936, the bulk of Mumbles was down on the foreshore and extended it as far as the pier and more or less unofficially the Black Pill. Very little up on the top where Higher Lane, where I was to live one day to my surprise. And this was not developed until after the war when the Duke of Beaufort cashed in on his multifarious lands. Anyway, as it was then, as I say, we didn't really count Langland and Caswell as part of Mumbles. They were extremely well off, and the heart of Mumbles was down in the village of Oystermouth, and the true beginnings of it was down at Southend. This is where the real Mumbles people first started, overlooked by a lovely castle and a little fishing village. And it had its times. And the greatest disaster of all, undoubtedly, was World War I, where this little village lost so many people. And if you're interested, go into Oystermouth Church one day when you have a chance and look at the carved rood, to see the names there, carved in wood, of the Mumbles boys that fell, not counting the ones who were wounded, not counting those who were paralysed with ill health afterwards after the result of it, but the ones who were killed alone, well into three figures. And the work of John Powell is restored more recently. But anyway, this was the first major blow that Mumbles had. And it was small. War came, land fit for heroes, for soldiers to come back to. And the Mumbles people that survived came back not to the situation that was carefully created after World War II, but came back to eventually a tremendous depression, mass unemployment, and misery. And when they lost their work, they lost their pride. So Mumbles was a shattered place, right up to the mid to late 30s. Round about the mid-30s, there were signs of a national recovery. And this showed itself in Mumbles. Now, I was born in 1925. Now it is 2021. And if you went to school and you did sums, you work it out that I am 96 years of age. And at the moment, today, feeling it. But that's by the way. Anyway, in 1936, two wonderful things happened to Mumbles. And the first thing I shall dismiss, although it's worth a chapter on its own, it's in my book. You must buy it. Superb book, one of the finest ever written. As it says here, many writers have failed to do Wales justice, but Maggs has the rare distinction of topping the list. So it's written with a sense of humour, and there's a chapter 6 called A Harbinger of Better Times, which starts off in 1936. Now, the first thing that happened of great import was the opening of the public library. If we wanted to read any books, we had to buy them. Money was desperately short in Mumbles, desperately short. With the mass unemployment, And of course, we passed books around. Tuppenny books were uh, the way that the people, we read The Wizard, the Skipper, The Adventure, the Rover, the Hotspur, the Magnet, the Gem. These were the tuppenny books that were on sale in all the bookshops. And we'd buy one and we'd swap it for all the others, and we would read avidly these books. There was no public library. There were private libraries, the Castle Library at the bottom of Woodville Road. Marion Clemens ran a little lone library down, which was eventually incorporated into the White Rose. And you took out a book for twopence a week, but that twopence was more than most people could afford. So we borrowed books, we changed books, but we read avidly. And in 1936, the council did what was probably the last good turn they ever did for Mumbles. They built the library. And this was stocked with treasures. And all of us who'd been reading so-called rubbish in the tuppenny books, we were weaned off them into the library. And this opened a new world for all the old people. People in their 80s, 90s, old Mumbles people could go into that library, read a newspaper for nothing in the reading room, which is now a reference library, and have all the reading in the world were on that shelf, the finest reading. There was a children's section, and we were considerably enriched by that library. Well, what better could happen than that? Well, one other thing. First of all, what was business like in Mumbles? Well, Mumbles abounded with shops. Every little back street had its own corner shop, everywhere. In the heart of Mumbles, where you had an intersection of roads, there would be shops. Take, for example, the corner I lived. I lived in a pub, the Victoria Inn, and I was blessed. I don't remember any other home in my life as a child, and I was brought up. I could sit in the bar sometimes as a favour if I was ill after a cold, and I would sit there talking to the residents. And in the 1920s, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, it was my privilege to sit down and talk to men who'd fought in World War I. It was then the late 1920s, so it was only 10 years since the war had finished. This was still fresh in their minds, and they had no work. Most of them were highly skilled tradesmen, top-class carpenters, top-class metal workers, and no work, nothing. No work, very little money, poverty. And with the poverty came the loss of pride. And one day, about early 30s, I was walking down to have a swim down the front by the bowling green. And I came round a corner off the Mumbles Road past the bowling green to approach the sea into Cornwall Place. And there was a queue on the pavement of men, 3 deep, stretching from the corner shop on the Mumbles Road all the way back to the sea, shuffling forward one by one, fully exposed to the public. These were the unemployed of Mumbles, queuing up for their dole money, in full view of everyone else. Mr. Thatcher, who ran the Labour Exchange, gave out the money, who I'm told was not very helpful in his attitude to these people. They were ashamed. And as I walked past, I recognized people who were customers in the pub. And I spoke. And to my surprise, they turned their heads away. And that night when I was home, I was telling my mother about this. I walked past the bowling green and I saw Yank down there, and I saw Albert Jenkins, and I spoke to them. She said, "Did you walk past that queue? Don't you ever do that again. If you see that queue lined up, you go down the end of the park. You've got to go in to see, go down the other way. Those men, you were embarrassed, those men." And they said they felt ashamed of being unemployed. Not that they got anything to be ashamed about. So that was a lesson. And that was the sort of thing that was going on in Mumbles. And nearly every man queued up there was a World War One warrior. Come back to Mumbles to nothing. Down South End, lots of shops which, prior to World War One, very fashionable little shopping area. Lovely old hotel, the Mermaid Hotel, where the judges stayed. There were little shops along there. Most of them were now boarded up. And I remember going down with my grandfather one day, and he remarked about it. My God, he said, this shopping centre has dropped down a bit. Coming into Mumbles, not much better. All the way in through the parade, shops boarded up. Just the chip shop was doing well. That was overlooking the park where Yellops is now. And all these shops were struggling. But there were shops everywhere. There were the proper shops down on the front. There was a shopping centre in Duns Lane. In the Duns, sorry, not Duns Lane. There was a new library being built in the Duns Lane. And along the Duns, there was a shopping centre with shops both sides in those days. And this is where the action centred that I'm leading up to. But as you went down, up Newton Road, and that was the extension of the shopping centre. And they were all local shops. The name above the door was the man who owned the shop. Graham White's shop, Mr. White, he had the bakers, there was Cliff Ross's, George Rees, all the way up, shoe shops, and everyone was run by the man who owned it. And how on earth they all survived, I do not know. On top of that, when you went back street, there were all the corner shops. And as I say, I lived in the Vic, the pub, and we were on a corner. Opposite was this little back street of Gloucester Place, Westbourne Place, going up the hill to John Street. That intersection, there was the Vic, there was Morris the Butcher's. On the corner was the wonderful, wonderful shop that epitomised all corner shops, Mary Taylor's Sweet Shop. Go up into the John Street, on the corner was Davis the Baker's, and further along was Sam Davis the brother, a little Welsh produce. Up the hill was T&G Davis the Bakers. They baked all the bread, most of the bread anyway, from Mumbles up to West Cross, which was delivered by horse and cart all day long. Tom and George were the boys who give their names to the firm, and one of them was on the cart. The other cart was a brother, George, Elaine, a complete family business, delivering bread all day long. Once a year, when summer came, they made ice cream. And you could go into the front shop and have a yellow custardy ice cream for a penny in a little cone. And then Sam started doing that. And in the 30s, pretty well, every little shop in Mumbles made their own ice cream under the most appalling conditions of cleanliness. Some was made in a garage. All over Swansea, garages made ice cream. There was no control. I can remember one shop in Swansea in a lane, a lot parallel to Kensington Crescent, along there, little lane. There was a garage there, absolutely filthy. And I won't name him because it's embarrassing, but this gentleman used to go out delivering ice cream in his bicycle and cart, made in this filthy mess. But anyway, this no control over it, ice cream made everywhere. But it was seasonal, it was only sold during the summer, and that was the end of it. Then along came the big boys. like Wall's ice cream appeared on the scene, and they started making ice cream, which again was totally different to the ice cream made in the shops. It was in blocks. To me, it seemed to be a very, very complex chemical. It certainly lacked the pleasure of the ice cream made in all these little shops. And we had to put up with that. And it looked as if they were going to take over. It was sold in the cinemas, Wall's Ice Cream, El Dorado, and a few other firms. But then, in 1936, when we were just getting used to the library, something happened in the Duns. Now, as I told you, there were shops on both sides in those days. On the corner of the chemist shop Boots, this was owned by Lowthers. Lowthers were chemists were there. Next to it was the post office on the same side, not opposite as it once did. Opposite was the church, and on the corner, Lowthers, as I say, the chemist, which eventually became Boots. Now, on the other corner, on the bit which was knocked down eventually completely, there was a rather odd-shaped house or shop, which extended into the shops on the seaside of the Duns. And those shops created a barrier between the street, the Duns, and the sea. And I think that when it was taken away, the village lost something in losing that one. And it lost the end building facing Boots the chemist on the square. Now that building, one morning we came down early in the year to see fencing going up. All the experts and Mumbles were saying what it was. Somebody said they're building another chapel. Some said it was going to be a clinic. Something, all sorts of rumours. And then a notice went up. And I forget the exact wording of it, but it said on it was words to the effect, "This site has been acquired by Charles Forte for the construction of an ice cream parlour." So that's what it's all about. Of course, we didn't pronounce it Forte, we pronounced it Forte. And that was it. Then the experts started. And how on earth can you sell ice cream 12 months of the year? It's summer when it's hot. That's what ice cream is for. And where's the money comes from? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do it? Nothing but a tale of woe. But the building went on, and it wasn't very long before at last down came the fencing. A notice appeared in the Evening Post, and it said two things: that the ice cream parlour was opening on May the 29th, that's 1936, and on the opening day, the owners, Fortes, were going to give away free ice cream. That day it opened. I was down there early to get up to the front of the queue, and I stood about sixth. With me was John Clements and Kenny Bale, I remember it well, and we lined up, and the queue started building up. It went past the block, down to where you could once upon a time walk down Newton Road and walk straight onto the beach in an underpass. It went past that, onto the bus, over the bus route which came into Mumbles, way, way back. And it started, the chattering was coming, the laughing, etc. And then there was activity, and the front door opened, and we were let into a queue. Now, the outside of the parlour was not of this century, 1936. It was ultra-modern. It was a beautiful design. There was a curve sweeping around the shop from the Duns, round, facing the square in a gorgeous curve, and to come down onto the station side. So the parlour was wrapped in a U-shaped sheet of glass, which went virtually from floor to ceiling. And in the doorway was a complex door. There was a little pillar in the middle, which contained samples of the ice cream dishes, wax samples, and you could go either side around that pillar, through the door, into this shop. And what was it like inside? Well, they picked blue as a dominant colour, and it was rather good because there was an iciness about it. But then it was this beautiful pale blue, the glass, the polished floors, and there were quality seating and tables, not like we were used to in public places. There were these lovely glass-topped tables on woven legs. The chairs were wicker. They were cushioned, comfortable, and they were spaced, not crammed on top of each other. And as you walked in, you were faced by a counter right across the whole width of the shop, behind which was mirrors and all sorts of incredibly advanced devices. There were a beautiful, at that time, lying idol. There were things that looked like pumps with chromium plated. Everything gleamed. Everything was spotlessly clean. And behind there was an army of workers, well, actually about 4 or 5. One of them struck me straight away. He was obviously Italian. Although he was tall, he had wavy hair combed straight back in parallel waves, and handsome man, and but could have only been Italian, in spotless white. With him was a smaller gentleman, standing about 5'6", little moustache, like Charlie Chaplin a little bit. Going a little bit thinner top, rather plump, surly looking, whereas the big one was all smiles, and there were 2 or 3 others there smiling welcome. Only the one scowling as he was there. I was to find out more about him shortly. We went in and we walked across the floor, and there was a big smile, and I was handed a cone. First thing I noticed was the cleanliness of the counter, and the barrels all there, and the instruments that they were using to dispose the ice cream. I saw things which I didn't know what they were for. I'd never seen anything like it before. They were all there. Although there was no coffee being made, there was a lovely smell of ice cream and coffee. Now, that's a rare blend that I've never smelled anywhere else except in Forte's. They made the ice cream and they made the coffee. That ice cream was delicious. I've never tasted ice cream. It was smooth, snow white, unlike the yellowish of all the others. It was marvellous. So, showing enterprise, I went to the back of the queue, and I came round, and it took me about, they were working hard. Half an hour, I back in the front, went in, tried to pull a face, and I must say that if you mathematically will work out that I was then, 2001, I was now 10 years of age, and coming up to my last couple of years in the council school, hoping to go on to grammar school if I was lucky. Well, anyway, I was tall and skinny, but anyway, I got away with it 3 times. But the 4th time, when I came in, a hand came out in front, and there was now an attendant at the door. The rumour went around that he was going to, that he would pick us out, and that we were going to be taken somewhere and done away with if we didn't behave ourselves and bugger off. That was the short message. So we called it a day. That was the beginning. Adults came down later, and they were dealt in a more civilized manner. They were invited to the front of the queue. They were given tubs to take home. and Fortes warmed themselves to the people of Mumbles. This was at a time when free gifts were few and far between, very hard to come. There wasn't a hell of a lot to laugh about. But let me make haste to say one thing, and that is that Mumbles was a happy place. I couldn't have had a happier childhood. In spite of the poverty, I never knew anything else. We weren't all that poor. We fed well. We had the sea, and we had company. There were no phones to talk to. We had to talk to each other. We were never alone. We were always in a group of friends. We had good school, and I was blessed with a good mother and father, and I had a blessed childhood. I wouldn't have changed it one little bit. Neither would my brother. And we had each other. We had the sea. We had infinite pleasures in Mumbles. We had the library now, and now we had a bonus. We had an ice cream parlour. But what did that mean? Well, it turned out that it came at a time when Mumbles was just beginning to pull out of that big depression of the 30s. The 1936, we were beginning. War was not all that far away, 3 years. And already steps were being prepared, being taken, preparing us for that war. That meant, of course, money was being spent by the government. We were beginning to get armed forces were being spread, and money was beginning to circulate again. And Fortes, was it by chance or was it a clever business move? I don't know. What made that that Fortes man come to Mumbles at a time when the depression was still rife, to walk across the square, which is a deplorable place. Mud, water, dirty posters on the wall. What was in the Swansea Empire? I can see it now. Nellie Wallace in the Swansea Empire. Cinema, hoardings, all tattered. Shops boarded up. Then this battered old corner shop, which this man saw, and he saw possibilities. And that's what makes some people, the talents they have, it doesn't have them gone. Why? They see an opportunity, but not only see the opportunity, but he had the courage to pursue it at a time when people still weren't spending money. I was probably the first Mumbles boy to try a North Pole, which cost sixpence. They had things like, they had fruit sundaes from sixpence. They went up to ninepence. And then, if you were very wealthy, you had the Supreme, a Knickerbocker Glory. That was 2 shillings and threepence. Now that's a hell of a lot of money in those days, 2 shillings and threepence. A boy spending money would be, if he was lucky, would be penny, tuppence a week, and every penny was counted. What was it going to become? Was it going to be just a place you call in for a penny cone, in and out? Or would you sit down at the table? Because to sit down at the table, you weren't encouraged to sit down. He didn't mind it, he'd let you eat your ice cream there, but of choice, it was to have one of the dishes on the menu. I wish I'd kept one of those menus now. But anyway, when we had a treat, we'd go down there, and gradually it took on. And then it became a meeting place. So, whereas before we all had cups of tea, once we tasted this Italian coffee or an Italian ice cream, in comfort, people started coming down from Swansea, and people started coming from other parts of town, and business people in their little shops would nip out, go in for a little break, and have a cup of coffee in Fortes. Fortes had arrived. Now then, they had 2 sons, Elio and Olympio, who came to our school. One was a year or two older, one was a year or two younger. Olympia was the younger, and dear Elio was the older. Elio was in the year above me, and Olympia was the year below me. And I used to walk home with him, and we became friends. And that was a friendship that lasted throughout my life. And I was proud to know Elio and Olympia. They were kind. They were, by our standards, they were very well off. Now, it wasn't all easy sailing, because shortly after this, Mussolini started flapping his wings. He started thinking of himself as a Julius Caesar to bring back the might and the greatness of Italy. And he wanted to empire build. He was beginning to get envious of Hitler. And so he decided that he would become aggressive. And he sent his army from North Africa and Italy into Abyssinia. Now, this was a very primitive country. I mean, when I say they fought with bows and arrows, they're not far from it. And he went in with tanks and aircraft. And he had the anger of the world on his back for this dreadful war, declaring war on what we said was an innocent nation. What's his name? Haile Selassie was the emperor, and he put up a manly fight, but he couldn't oppose. He couldn't oppose the might of Italy. Now then, all the Italians over here now, although many of them now had British citizenship, paid for this. We said we tarred them all with the same brush. That most of them, Elio, Olympia, they wanted nothing to do with that. And then there was worse to come, because although they weathered that, and it didn't make any difference to the boys, we were still friends with Elio and Olympia. And then, sadly, World War II broke out, and after Dunkirk, Mussolini saw his opportunity of coming in and catching us when we were really down. We were now in a hell of a mess. We'd fled from France. I was now coming up to 15, 16, more aware of the politics. And Italy chose to come in and join the Axis with Hitler. And they thought now they could move into North Africa, and he could empire build all the way along the South Mediterranean shore. It would be all his. But of course he had the shock of his life, because even the remains of the British army there beat them, and it wasn't until Rommel came in with the German forces that pushed us back again. But this again brought up the hatred for the Italians. And you've always got people who are ready to limited mentality, and their only answer to anything is a cowardly action. They'd smash the windows at night when nobody could see them of the ice cream parlour. They would damage their cars. They made life extremely unpleasant for the boys. And then they were interned. And I think it went to the Isle of Man, I'm not sure. But I believe some of the family were already serving in the armed forces. And I know when I joined the army in 1944, my next bed, there was an Italian boy, a full-blooded Italian, whose mother had a small ice cream parlour in London. And he was a hell of a nice bloke. And he had a lot of stick from various people, limited mentality. But anyway, all this made no difference. These boys, they were over here, they were British, Many of them joined the armed forces. The ice cream parlour was still open. They served it. Mr. Macari disappeared. He was interned. The boys vanished. And then the war, I was away. And then when I came back, I had to start all over again as a student. I had to find, I was now 22. I'd been away overseas 4 years. And I came back, not that I did much. And I came back, and then I found the ice cream parlour was back in action. They had a bad struggle immediately after the war. They couldn't get the materials. They couldn't get the sugar. They couldn't get the quality stuff, and the ice cream was not terribly good. But it came right, and they persevered. The ice cream parlour opened. And when I started coming home as a student, where did we meet up? Down in Forte's. And Forte's started, there was nowhere for people to meet in those days. You went to church, you would have, there were no cafes or anything, essentially we couldn't afford them. But the Forte's man saw this opening, and he saw the pleasure it brought. Then, of course, the planners decided to get rid of the seaside of Dunslade, and this lovely, lovely ice cream parlour went. And the funny thing was, in 1936 or thereabouts, there was a film released based on a book by H.G. Wells, who wrote it about 1908, and it was called The Shape of Things to Come. And it started off, this film, with a war. And it was a war that came, as forecast at the beginning, that came, and it ended civilization. And it showed how the all civilization was destroyed, and there were ruins everywhere at the end of it. And then how the new age began, how those who had survived the wars was rebuilding, and they built all these beautiful modern houses and these modern buildings. And the funny thing was, the building of Forte's was as if it had come from the shape of things to come. Well, they closed it down, and to me, much as I enjoyed the new Forte's which appeared in the Duns, because the ice cream was the same standards, the lovely tables and the clatters of chairs and cups and the smell of coffee was brought there. And when I came down from London, I went in there, and it's the first time I'd been into the new one, and I was with my wife from London, and I said, come on in, let's have a Forte's ice cream. It's something special. I haven't had one for years. And I went in and sat down. Behind the counter was Tony Macari, a youngster, serving. Tony was, as we all know, gay, full of fun, a hell of a night, one of the nicest boys I've ever met in my life. And Olympia was there. Put on a bit of weight now, Olympia. Looked a little bit like Enrico Caruso. He was behind there serving, all mouth, Olympio talking, shouting to people, and he stopped. He saw me, and he dropped everything, and he came round the counter down, and he came and sat by me, and he put his arm around me, and he was tears in his eyes, and he said, where the hell have you been when you come back to Mumbles? And anyway, he was there, and a few minutes later, Elio, he came down as well, and it was lovely. Anyway, then there'd been a bit of a drama in Mumbles in which I'd been involved. My marriage had broken up, and when I'd first qualified, I come back to practice, and in fairness to my partner, it was a 90-10 situation, the fault. Unfortunately, 90% my fault, 10% hers, maybe. But I bitterly regret the way of life I led, and my marriage broke up deservedly, and I sold my practice, and I left. And just before leaving, a person came to see me, and it was Mr. Macari. He came to see me. He still couldn't speak English very well, and he was very fond of my mother and father, who always went to have coffee and talk to him. How's the boy? And when he came and he said, you stay, Mumbles. You're wonderful dentist. You win all prizes. You come back because you love Mumbles. You stay. Mumbles in your heart. And I said, no, I've got to go. I said, I messed up. I'm off. And give everybody a chance to sort themselves out. Sounds dramatic, but it wasn't all that dramatic. And he said, don't you go, you bloody fool if you go, you bloody fool. And he stormed off, little moustache. Well, anyway, I went. And I came back I come back down and leave. And we went down to Forte's in Limeslade. He had a shop in Limeslade. He had the ice cream parlours everywhere, all over the place. They had these ice cream parlours. And Mr. Macari liked to go down to Limeslade. I don't know why. And I went down with my mother and father, and he was serving ice cream, and he saw me, and put the ice cream for me to my mother. And I went to pay, and he went, oh God, he said, you bloody fool, when you come back to Mumbles, he said, you never go away. He came out, and he said, you tell me, bloody fool. He said, we told him. But anyway, I married again, and I had a cracking practice. Anyway, I must talk about that now. But Mumbles was always in my heart. I'm a Mumbles boy, brought up in a pub, and I was brought up on other people's lives. I've shared them, and I always listened to their stories. I've never forgotten them. And part of my life in Mumbles was Forte's ice cream parlour, and the library, the ice cream parlour, and Forte's. And the two wonderful friends I met, Elio and Olympio, their families. Eventually I came back and they became patients. And then I remember the sad day we lost Olympio. And Elio broke his heart. They had all those MGs they collected. They collected MGs. They had a perfect MG of every mark in their house in Caswell, covered in sheets. And the two of them together used to clean those cars. And he lost Olympio. And one day in the chair, he was talking to me with tears in his eyes. And he was saying, I've never been able to go back and lift those sheets without Olympio. That's the sort of family they were. And anyway, I was asked to pay a tribute at Olympio's funeral. It was a great honour, and I did that. Elio became a patient over the years, and he'd come down. And there's one little incident as well that marked out the Italian. He was then working down in the cafe down in Limeslade, and I went in one morning. I forget what it was. I was on holiday, or I was, and he was on the floor on his hands and knees. Now he must have been. He was a big man. He put on a lot of weight, but he's on the floor, washing the floor down. And I said, what the hell are you doing down there? And Elio and his Scottish, I said, bloody cleaner didn't come in this morning, the Scottish accent. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he said, what do I do? He said, open up a dirty shop or not? He said, it's either that or not open at all. So I cleaned it. That's the professionalism of the Italian. And he cleaned it, and he would open up. And he used to come down, practice, talk to me, and then Elio moved on, went to a joined his maker, and the story really of Elio and Olympio ended then. And again, I was asked to pay tribute to him in Our Lady Star and Sea, and it was a great privilege to do that. And my brother loyally stuck to Fortes, and I never used to go anywhere much. And then when we retired, my wife died. My second wife died. She was only 54. And I was on my own, and I started seeing more of my brother. I started going back to the church, and I started writing, and we started going back to Fortes. And again, I saw Lucia, who I knew her as a little girl. And one thing I remember and will never forget, on my 90th birthday, 6 years ago, I went down to Limestone with my brother to have a coffee. And we ordered them, and we sat outside. And a few minutes later, out came, smiling, the lovely Lucia, smiled like a Cheshire cat, and she put in front of me and my brother Colin a Fortes, my mind's going, a Fortes ice, the big one.
Knickerbocker Glory.
Knickerbocker Glory. She put it in front of me, and happy birthday. That's the sort of woman she is. I go down there regularly, or did until we had the COVID strike. I took my whole family down there. It cost me £80 for breakfast. They all had the massive breakfast, and it was my treat not so long ago. And I still find that this wonderful ice cream parlour lives on, and that is what Fortes brought to Mumbles. It was a turning point, by chance, you say, I don't know. Or was it just the genius of that Italian gentleman, who it must have been a Forte, who put it there? And I talked far too long. I do apologize. Thank you very much indeed. Long may Fortes reign.